in Singapore, but in far north Queensland we do have a problem with the vandalism in school gardens, and it's very distressing and it makes people feel really sad. And the school my children went to, they actually put a very high chain link fence around the garden to stop that people actually couldn't climb over to keep the garden intact. Now, you know, other people in other places have to, in far north Queensland, have to put fences around their gardens to keep the wild pigs out, you know. So, you know, fencing a garden is a kind of normal thing. It's just in urban areas they had to fence that particular garden at my children's school against vandalism. And then, so that's just a little cautionary tale. I mean, it may not be a problem for you, but it was a problem for us. And sensory gardens, we all love sensory gardens. We all love going out and smelling and touching and playing in a sensory garden. Okay, now the other thing that's I'm really pushing for, this is the work that I do with schools as part of my job as an academic is to do what's called community service. And I have a wonderful job. I get to go out and do community service and play in schools and do frogs and fun things. And biodiversity gardens, the whole idea is that they're research, developed, designed and grown by students to basically increase the small animal and plant biodiversity within school grounds. This is actually part of the Queensland Department of Education's policy, because school grounds in Australia represent a lot of landmass. You know, collectively, if you add up all the hectareage, it does really add up. So if you're encouraging school communities to put in biodiversity gardens, or you know, even just in little corners of the school, you're actually increasing the biodiversity of the state because of the, you know, the huge numbers of acreages or hectareage. So this is becoming very popular in Australia because it works. The beautiful thing about biodiversity gardens is, say you want one of those nice honey eaters, you know, is local to your area, and you've got one of those grass, and you go out and you dig it and you research the right kind of plants, and then everyone goes out and they dig their plant, and then they're all looking after that plant, and that plant grows, and you've got a critical mass of the right kind of bird plants. The birds arrive. Then you can go out, the kids can go out, you know, photograph their bird, blog their bird, write about their bird, put their bird on Facebook. It's really exciting, it's really rewarding, because all the birds were looking for was this kind of chance to move in, you know. It's the the temple theory. You know the temple theory, build it and they shall arrive. You know, so that kind of biodiversity gardening. Frogs, it works as well. Beetles, lizards, you can do lizard gardens. Lizard gardens involve putting all these rocks at just the right angle for lizards to lie in the sun. Apparently lizards are quite particular. They like certain ways to lie in the sun and not others. So you have to put the rock, you have to look at how the sun's travelling, how the sun moves through the seasons, put the rocks in the right angle, do everything right, you have an awful lot of lizards. You know, so there's a lot of thinking in this, because the really thing about doing these biodiversity gardens is you've got to really work out what the animal or plant needs. And then you work out how to provide that, you know, which is a very old tradition, you know, of human husbandry, animals and plants. You work out what they need, and then you provide it, and lo and behold, you have them. It's very successful, and you get these wonderful, fairly, it's not instant, but fairly good time feedbacks for getting the animals. It's very useful, like if you have a school next to kind of a remnant forest or a little bit of regrowth where there's kind of a few species hanging in there, and you can provide more habitat in your school grounds, and those species will move in and start living in your school grounds. Okay? Now in Australia we don't have any problems with monkeys or any of those big mammals. Our mammal fauna are very shy, retiring, discreet. They're marsupials and monotremes mainly. The only natural placentals are rats and bats. So these gardens usually work really well. Of course, you'd have to just adapt them to your own situation. Okay, now just to return, there's a lot of information about how educational programs, the benefits of these educational programs. The observed benefits are quoted as being both broad-ranging and encouraging. So, and they're classified as, there's a lot of, there's a list there. Better performance on standardized measures, reduced classroom management problems because you've got better relationships, you've got increased student engagement, and you've got an enthusiasm for learning, greater pride and ownership, and this particularly works well with students from disadvantaged backgrounds or lower socioeconomic backgrounds where they don't arrive at school with a great deal of social capital, and it's important. Okay, now I think I have done quite enough talking. So I was thinking that our next period of time that we have, you can ask me questions now if you like. We'll have a little group discussion about questions, but then what I wanted you to do was to form little groups, about four people, 4 or 5 people, whatever you feel comfortable forming, and have your own garden conversation and share with each other, your ideas. Just have a nice garden conversation.
Okay.
But just before we form our little groups and maybe have a little break, does anyone have any general questions about that presentation on the research literature?
Will there be any limitations regarding the learning structure of gardening?
Limitations?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh yes, there's lots of barriers and limitations, but educators are professionals. They're professionally good at getting over limitations, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean the specific ones are, what will, there are some...
There are no curriculum limitations.
Oh.
Any curriculum document that you look at, you can look at what it says to do, and you know that you make pedagogical decisions. You can either sit down, read a book, do a worksheet, and say you've met that pedagogy, met that outcome. Or you can take that curriculum statement and you can go into the garden. There's no limitations in the interpretation of curriculum. None at all. There are, of course, safety limitations. You've always got to fill out and make sure your forms are filled out. Everyone's wearing their sunscreen with a hat. Gloves. If you've got poisonous spiders, gloves are a really good idea. I learned that the hard way. I just never knew how many poisonous spiders there were in Australia. And then one day we had these frogs. These kids were digging up. They were supposed to be digging this hole, and they were digging up these frogs, and they thought that they were toads, and they were kind of chucking them. It turns out they're this really rare kind of frog, but we saved most of them. That's another headache. Let's identify the animal, shall we? Yeah, so, there's all kinds of those safety things. We all have to go, we have to get, you may need, planning permission, and just the usual routines of education that we have to go through. I always treat gardening as like a field trip, so that you prepare for it in the same way that you prepare for a field trip. Do all your paperwork, get everything signed off, have all your safety gear that you need, have the kids really well trained what to do. Very important that they take responsibility for themselves and for each other when it comes to safety in the garden. And use plastic spades. Just be very cautious about the tools that you use. Use very child-friendly tools, All the safety routines that we're now becoming quite familiar with.
I've got a question.
You mentioned about sensory gardens.
Yes.
What kind of?
Oh, there's various different kinds. There's a really wonderful sensory garden in the Botanic Gardens in Melbourne, and it sort of does your 5 senses. It does touch, hearing, you know, they've got pods that rattle and things, and touch, you get all the different types of smooth or rough or serrated, and then of course the popular one is smell, where you plant a range of plants that either release a smell themselves, or the child can touch it and touch the leaf, and it releases a smell, like something like a lemon myrtle or something, you know, it doesn't smell until you rub it, and then you get that lovely smell. What's the other one? Hearing is when you get some pods and grasses that rustle in the wind, and this one I've forgotten. Sight. Taste. Yeah, taste. Obviously, we have nice edible plants that aren't poisonous. And
such as, is there a good example of edible?
a lot of herbs. You know, just straightforward oregano, basil. You know, what's the one that's similar to oregano in growth but tastes quite different?
Thyme, rosemary?
Thyme, sage, rosemary, all them. Yeah.
Even products that you can use for a dinner,
Yes.
that can end up as a dinner.
Yes. Anything that can end up as dinner.
Dinner like.
Next time we'll have soup
Except for chili.
using herbs.
Except for chili.
Double chili soup.
Have we done all the senses?
Soup.
And the sight one, of course, would be.
Flowers.
And interesting, you just don't have to do the flowers. You can do because we can see green so well, you can do the very pale greens, or the dark greens, or the yellow, or the red. You know, you can do all those lovely. Yeah. So you can either pick one sense, or you can do 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 senses. Yeah. So that's a sensory garden.
There's one in Topayo here.
Is there?
Yeah. There's a community garden in Topayo, which is a sensory garden.
Oh, I see.
Oh yeah. That's fine.
Very good for young children, very good for young children, and autistic people. Also, I read one study where it was very powerful. You know, people who process things very strongly through their senses, and so they can be very. I think there's a video online about the Melbourne Garden. I mean, I tried to go see it, but it was bucketing with rain and freezing cold, as it is in Melbourne. So I gave up. I felt distinctly unsensory. Any other questions?
I
Yes.
was just wondering if you have a mosquito problem with the children's gardens in Cairns, because here there's a really big mosquito problem, and they do a lot of fogging, which then can cause problems for us trying to have butterfly plant, you know, butterflies, dragonflies and things.
There is no resolution for that because I mean, dengue is a really serious problem, and it's endemic here. And dengue's not quite endemic in Cairns, but it's getting there. It is a really serious problem. I never travel without DEET bug spray. You know, the kind that you put on your legs and then it takes plastic off, you know. I'd rather be poisoned by the bug spray than go through something like a dengue attack, you know, or Ross River fever, or Japanese encephalitis, or malaria, or, you know, all the things that all those wonderful insects have learnt to give us, because insects are actually cleverer than we are in their own way. So yes, that is a problem, and that's why you end up making some decisions. Can I do a dragonfly garden here? Dragonflies are actually pretty hardy things. Dragonflies are quite successful. You get quite good results from dragonflies in quite a small area. But I really don't know how you work around the dengue stuff. It's a really horrible disease, and people do die from it. So,
What about malaria? I think a lot of people die from malaria.
depends on the treatment that they get. But dengue got a high death rate associated with it. Anyway, so my answer to that is If you're lucky to live in an area where there's lots of small bats, you'll find that there's a lot less mosquitoes. You know, small bats are really, really important to the world's ecosystem. There's about 1,500 species of them or something. They're all kind of hanging in there. But, you know, they're very important. So, you know, maybe one thing you could do is do a bat garden. September's bat garden.
I wonder how they do
Look, I don't know. I mean, this is the sort of thing you really need to seek advice from experts on. There's lots of experts. That's the other beautiful message. There's lots of experts out there.
Singapore Ministry of
Yeah, and remember there's the Nature Society. It's a very big, powerful Nature Society, and it's doing fabulous work. They would be able to help you. You know, you've got to find a bat enthusiast in, you know, in a Nature Society. It's, yeah.
Sorry, most of our preschools are held in our void decks below the block. So how do we actually set up a garden within the classroom? Given the space constraints, and we can't do any gardening outdoors.
That's right. We were looking at hanging gardens, weren't we? Who did the hanging gardens? You can do hydroponic and hanging gardens. And you know, even at a preschool, if you just wanted to start with those bromeliads, you know, bromeliads are really good to grow inside, and you know, just something very simple that is difficult to kill, can live on a fairly low level of light, likes a little bit of care. Again, you're going to have to get advice. But if you look at, say, it depends what you wanted to do. If you were just doing growth from a seed, you can do bean plants. And you can do that wonderful experiment where you put some bean plants on a windowsill and then you put the bean plant in the cupboard. And then the bean plant in the cupboard goes crazy trying to look for light. You know, that's a real conversation starter with young children. So my advice is, yes, do as much as you can. It's really important to have as many alive things as you can in early childhood classroom. Not just pictures of live things, but actual live things.
Because I would like to have my classroom with lots of plants and living things.
Yes.
But given the constraints of space,
Yeah.
so it's a challenge to bring life into the classroom.
But we found a site. Yesterday where they had solved that. They had some drip system, and it just they kept the roots, the aerial gardening or something it was called. Aeroponics. Okay, there are solutions to this, but it requires a little bit of imagination. I mean, I've seen early childhood teachers grow, like butterfly, you know, grow caterpillars inside in styrofoam boxes and nets. You know, you can be quite inventive. And definitely, in terms